Hi everyone, welcome to Yuktahaar project number 2, and our topic for today is type 1 and type 2 diabetes. I'll wait for a few people to join. Okay, so I hope people who have joined me can hear me well. So the topic for today is type 1, type 2 diabetes. Now we often think of them as together, or we maybe do not understand कि precisely दोनों में difference क्या है, क्या दोनों एक हैं, क्या at least diet wise क्या दोनों का approach similar है या same है, क्या करना चाहिए. All of those things is something that we are going to address today. So firstly, ये होता क्यों है, इनके causes अलग अलग हैं क्या, type 1 के क्या causes हैं, type 2 के क्या causes हैं. तो of course the causes are different, and not only different but very very contrastingly different. और क्योंकि causes different है तो obviously जो manage करने का जो approach है, the way we will manage type 1 और type 2, वो approach भी काफ़ी अलग है, and I am going to talk about both the approach today. So to begin with, let us first understand how this whole thing works, right? तो हम सबसे पहले हम जब खाना खाते हैं, the food that we eat, once it goes inside our system, it gets broken down into glucose, correct? So that is something that a lot of people know already. अब ये जो glucose है, it is like a fuel to our cells. It is this glucose that helps us nourish, that keeps our organs functioning and everything, so on and so forth. And so that this glucose enters the cells, it needs a key. इसको एक चाबी चाहिए ताकि ये ग्लूकोज जो है it can enter into our body cells, and that चाबी is insulin, right? अब insulin क्या है? It's an hormone that is produced by the pancreas, the gland, the organ that we are going to discuss today, because it is the most important organ when it comes to diabetes. So टाइप 1 डायबिटीज में क्या होता है कि जो पैनक्रियाज है उसका जो बीटा सेल्स है जो ये इंसुलिन प्रोड्यूस करता है नॉर्मली, in type 1 diabetes this beta cells itself gets destroyed and the insulin is not produced. So you can think of it as that the chabi is not there itself, the key is not there itself in type 1 diabetes. In type 2 diabetes, on the contrary, what happens is कि ये pancreas जो है इंसुलिन प्रोड्यूस तो करता है, पर वो जो इंसुलिन जो प्रोड्यूस हुआ है it does not work effectively. So उसका काम जो होता है वो उस काम को सही तरीके से नहीं करता है. And in type 2 diabetes, you can think of it as a broken key. That the key is there, the chabi is very much there, but it is broken. It खराब हो गया है. So this is the thing in a type 1 diabetes and a type 2 diabetes. होता क्यों है? What is the reason behind this? In type 1 diabetes, as I said, the insulin itself is not there. The pancreas has stopped producing it. So what are the reasons for it? The reasons for it are many. One, it is genetic, of course, that it can be because of genetic reasons. It is also because of autoimmunity. Autoimmune क्या होता है, condition क्या होता है, something that I discussed at length when I did the thyroid session. It is also seen that exposure to toxins or virus, तो अगर कोई viral infection हुआ है, exposure to any kind of toxins or viruses हुआ है, and then of course you have been exposed to a lot of medicines, that itself can then lead to a type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is not a gradual thing, unlike type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is more of a lifestyle thing. जब हम देखते हैं कि diabetes के साथ not necessary but more or less ब्लड प्रेशर भी है, कोलेस्ट्रॉल भी है, that is the type 2 diabetes, which of course is more common, जिसमें obesity भी है और जिसमें sedentary lifestyle है. So that is the type 2 diabetes. When we talk about type 2 diabetes, that of course type 2 diabetes is not sudden like type 1. Type 2 diabetes happens gradually. जैसे कि आप फ्रेंड्स के साथ बाहर गए, आप रात में 1 बजे पिज्जा खाएं और आते ही सो गए, तो ऐसा नहीं है कि आप मॉर्निंग में उठेंगे और आपको टाइप 2 डायबिटीज हो गया. But if you keep doing this day after day, week after week, years after years, then finally we see that type 2 diabetes has set in. So it's more of a gradual thing that happens because of a very erratic, indisciplined lifestyle, wrong choices of food, wrong timings of sleep, inactivity, all of those things. Type 1 is more of a thing which happens early in the life. In fact, इसको पहले हम juvenile diabetes भी बोलते थे, क्योंकि ये usually childhood और adolescence के वक्त देखा जाता था. in a way, of course, it can be related to lifestyle, but mostly it's more of the autoimmune reaction, more of infections, the viral exposures, genetic, and all of those things. This is just an overview of what a type 1 and a type 2 diabetes is. Now, coming back to this book, where I said that, I'll try to first explain how this book can be useful, the 10-week diet explained in the book, how it can be useful for managing the lifestyle diseases. तो अगर आपको टाइप 2 डायबिटीज है तो आप आंख बंद करके 100% इस बुक को फॉलो कर सकते हैं. यू डू नॉट नीड टू चेंज एनीथिंग. Everything that is there in the book from A to Z can be and in fact should be followed by a type 2 diabetic person. In fact, जब हम project 1 कर रहे थे, we had a lot of people जिनको PCOS था, of course with insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes symptoms. We had one participant in the project called Vishwanath. I even did a Saturday candid chat series with him. तो उसका चैट मेरे गाइड सेक्शन में है, आप जाके उनको सुन भी सकते हैं. So he was a proper type 2 diabetic and he has explained how just 2 weeks into following the diet in the book, he saw that his blood sugar has started responding better, and by the end of the 10 weeks it was already normal. So this is all there in our guide section, so you can go and see. So for type 2 diabetes, I will say that you can just follow the book as it is. So many things in the book, all are very, very useful. For type 1 diabetes, 80% of the book can still be followed. 20% क्यों फॉलो नहीं करना है और एग्जैक्टली क्या चेंजेस करने हैं is something that I'm going to discuss ahead in the session. Now there are many myths when it comes to diabetes and I just want to take up those myths first because बहुत कुछ है जो लोग सोचते हैं, especially in terms of diet, also in terms of lifestyle. So I want to first address those myths and then I'll take up the section of the what to do. So we'll first discuss don'ts and then I'll discuss the do's. So number one thing is like the number one myth that people have is that carbs and sugar is the reason for diabetes. ये एक बहुत बड़ा myth है. I have met so many people in my lifetime, in my practice, जो बोलते हैं कि डायबिटीज हो गया है, मतलब डायग्नोस हो गया, डायबिटिक है, तो इसलिए मैंने चीनी छोड़ दिया है, मिठाई छोड़ दिया है. एंड दे समहाउ फील कि चीनी और मिठाई ये दो चीज छोड़ देने से उन्होंने अपना काम कर लिया है, माई जॉब इज डन. क्योंकि हमारे तरफ से तो ये सिर्फ शुगर का प्रॉब्लम है, ये शुगर की बीमारी है, और अगर हमने डाइटरी शुगर और मिठाई बंद कर दिया सो आवर जॉब इज डन. So that is number one thing that is wrong, because sugar or any food for that matter in itself cannot be the cause of a lifestyle disease. जिस तरह से हम ये नहीं बोल सकते कि आप ये एक फलाना कुछ खा लो और इससे आपका ये डिजीज ठीक हो जाएगा, उसी तरह हम ये भी नहीं बोल सकते कि आप ये फलाना मत खाओ और इससे आपका डिजीज ठीक हो जाएगा. Sugar or carbs whatsoever is not the reason of diabetes. Lifestyle, a bad lifestyle is the reason for any of these diseases. We are talking about diabetes right now, so yes, even for diabetes, right? When we talk about sugar, try to understand कि type 1, type 2 diabetes में what we see, what gets manifested is a high blood sugar in your blood work. That's precisely how your doctor must have gauged कि आपको diabetes है. Type 1 में obviously you need an antibody test because it's different from type 2, but high blood sugar whatsoever is one of the things that get manifested. And often it is thought कि high blood sugar है, इसका मतलब खाने में sugar हटा दो, कम कर दो, बंद कर दो. Not even कम कर दो, in fact बंद कर दो. But that is not how it works. Try to understand that we are talking about cellular degeneration in diabetes. When we talk about type 1 diabetes, we are talking about undernourishment. Type 1 diabetic people are mostly people, most of the times they are also people who are losing weight. In both the diabetes, these are people who are extremely fatigued all the time. These are also the people who are cellular, at the cellular level, they are very undernourished. So really this is not the time to exclude foods. This is the time to include foods. This is the time to include the right quality of foods. Carbs especially is so important because it's going to give energy to both the kinds of diabetic people who are always fatigued. They try to find out why I'm feeling so fatigued, but they are almost always fatigued, always feeling no energy. उस समय अगर आप लो कार्ब्स करते हैं या नो कार्ब्स करते हैं या फिर आप लो कार्ब हाई प्रोटीन डाइट के तरफ जाते हैं, you are only going to worsen your condition. You need carbs not only for energy, but as we talk about autoimmune reaction which is there in type 1, inflammation which is there in both type 1 and type 2, you need to understand that we need to work on our gut lining. गट का और इम्यूनिटी का, इन्फ्लेमेशन का क्या रिश्ता है, मेरे बुक में बहुत अच्छे से एक्सप्लेन किया हुआ है. मैंने थायराइड में भी इसको थोड़ा सा एक्सप्लेन किया था, सो आई डोंट वांट टू गो अहेड एक्सप्लेनिंग दी connection between gut barrier and immunity and inflammation again. But of course we all know that there is a relation, a very strong relation, and if you want to take care of that gut barrier ताकि आप इम्यूनिटी पे काम कर सके, इन्फ्लेमेशन जो हो गया है दोनों टाइप्स ऑफ डायबिटिक में उस पे काम कर सके, देन व्हाट यू नीड इज carbs, because most of the prebiotics क्या होता है, the food for microbes in your gut, so most of the prebiotics are carbs. Of course not the refined ones, but these are the rustic, the fibrous, the complex carbs like the millets that is there that my book speaks about. So you need carbs. If you go carb free or low carbs, then you're depriving your microbes of this very precious food, and it is going to backfire, and it is only going to make you more inflamed. It is only going to worsen your condition. When we talk about sugar, also understand कि सिर्फ आपने वो 2 चम्मच अगर चीनी या शक्कर या जो भी आप अपने पूरे दिन भर में चाय कॉफी में लेते हैं, आपने वो बंद कर दिया because probably this is the visible sugar. आपको दिख रहा है, आपको लग रहा है मैंने शक्कर बंद कर दिया, but what you're doing is having a peg of whiskey and then sleeping off in the night, then it's not going to work anyways. Whiskey itself has a lot of sugar, but it's the invisible sugar that we don't see, and we often unfortunately have doctors telling that, you know, take 1 peg of alcohol, it's fine, just 1 is fine. But what I want to imply is that it's a complete lifestyle. You can quit your rotis, you can quit your theplas, you can quit your bhakaris, and then you say that, you know, I'm going to sleep at 1 AM in the night. No, nothing is going to work. So you think of it as a lifestyle. Just quitting things is not there. It's about moderation. Just taking 2 teaspoons of sugar is not going to harm your diabetes. Even fruits. People have so much inhibitions when it comes to diabetics and fruits. Fruits again is just not carbs. Fruit also has antioxidants. It also has a precious prebiotic fiber, जिसके बारे में मैं बात कर रही हूँ. It is about eating them at the right time, of course. Fruits को आपको सनसेट के बाद नहीं खाना चाहिए. आप उसको बहुत सुबह उठते ही खाने मत लग जाओ. 10 AM to 4 PM is the right time for fruits. A lot of people fear rice. So rice is also there when people say, okay, I had rice and, you know, it's not good for diabetes, I'll quit rice. So again, I'll say that, of course, millets is something that I always emphasize, especially for sugar control, for a lot of things. So millets is something that you have to include in your plan. But a lot of people are completely new to millets. अगर आपने मिलेट्स कभी खाया ही नहीं है, then of course you will not be able to include just millets in your plan. Like you can't have millets all 3 meals a day right from day 1. You would want to increase the frequency gradually. तो बाकी टाइम आप क्या खाएंगे? Is rice that bad? That is the question. Now there are 2 kind of answer for it. एक चीज ये है कि डायबिटिक्स के लिए स्पेशली व्हाट हैज बीन सीन इन ट्रेडिशनल विजडम is that the kind of rice you should have, people who are diabetic, both type 1 and type 2, is the rice which is at least a year old. So if you really go to, you know, places in Kerala or even down south, वहाँ पे राइस जो पैडी हार्वेस्ट होता है, पैडी को हार्वेस्ट करने के बाद में उसको डायरेक्टली पाउंडिंग के लिए या पॉलिशिंग के लिए नहीं यूज किया जाता है. हार्वेस्ट करने के बाद उस पैडी को एक वुडन चेम्बर या वुडन बॉक्स में रखा जाता है फॉर 1 ईयर. जब वो राइस, वो पैडी 1 साल पुराना हो गया है, तब उसको निकाला जाता है एंड देन इट इज, you know, gone through the further process, जो कि पाउंडिंग, पॉलिशिंग जो भी है वो उसके बाद किया जाता है. So if you are really like diabetic and not borderline but really high diabetic, then I'll really recommend that you look for 1-year-old rice. That is one thing. अगर 1-year-old राइस मिल ही नहीं रहा है, मुश्किल है, the other alternative is कि राइस को पकाने से पहले जो कच्चा चावल है उसको आप ड्राई रोस्ट करो कढ़ाई में. once it's dry roasted a little, then you can normally just cook it. जैसे जो भी आपको बनाना है, पुलाव, बिरयानी steam करके, वैसे आप that is the second option. So that also is there. If you're borderline diabetic, not very high diabetic, I would not say that, you know, be very fussy upon the rice. Of course, roasting and then cooking rice is a very easy thing, so I don't understand why would not that be possible. But when I say don't fuss over it, what I mean is, if suppose you step out of your house, you've gone for a holiday for 3 to 4 days or 5 days whatsoever, and then don't fuss over the fact that, you know, should I have rice or should not I have rice, because ultimately, as I said, कोई एक single food तो diabetic या कोई भी बीमारी को cause नहीं कर सकता है. So at the end of the day, what you need to do is, you need to include carbs, you need to include proteins as well, you need to have a well balanced plan. Again, a lot of people, what they do when they get diagnosed of diabetes is, not only they go low carbs, but they would also want to have high proteins. Now high proteins, if you're thinking in terms of non-vegetarian food, then nothing more than once or twice a week is what is required, because anything more than that can cause a lot of gut barrier dysfunction, it can cause a lot of inflammation, and it's, as I said, is going to backfire. I have spent a good, I think, 4 to 5 pages in my book explaining with lot of scientific research papers for people who want to see what is this research I'm talking about. I have spent a good portion of my book giving a lot of facts out there as to why low carb, high protein diet, the typical one where you don't have carbs at all and you're only having either dals and sprouts or meat and eggs, why that can really cause heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes and any of the other lifestyle diseases. So please stay away from low carb, high protein diets. You don't have to fear sugar as well till the time you know that you're having 2 to 3 teaspoons of sugar at max in a day. Honey especially is very good for type 2 diabetes. So again, we are talking about the quality here. Quality important है. आप सिर्फ sugar को ऐसा देख के खराब मत सोचिए. It is about quality also. Good quality honey. What is a good quality honey? Honey which is non-pasteurized, which is unfiltered, which is unrefined, which is raw. If you have that kind of honey, then it's really good for diabetes. And if you're just going to add 2 to 3 teaspoons of that to your anything, your beverages, your food, any such thing, it's really not going to do any harm to your sugar levels. Jaggery, unrefined sugar, these are all good things, of course, to be used in moderation, but definitely not something that you have to be fearful of. I have mentioned in my book also that the important thing is not choosing honey over jaggery or jaggery over honey or honey over khand and this and that. It's about rotating the different kinds of sugars. So you go with honey for 4 days a week, you do jaggery 2 days a week, and 1 day a week you do unrefined sugar. So it's more about rotating different types of sugars, because at the end what is important is diversity in your food, in your diet. So that is one myth I wanted to address. The second myth that I wanted to address is everything about labeled diets. So sugar-free mithai. A lot of diabetic people, Diwali aayega, Ganpati aa raha hai, what they will do is they will want to have sugar-free mithai. Or there's always this thing, label mein likha rehta hai, no added sugar. So they will have no added sugar desserts. They will want to go for intermittent fasting diet, because somehow it is believed by a lot of people that intermittent fasting is going to solve my insulin issues, my blood sugar. So they go for all these low fat, fat free, low calorie, gluten free, this free, that free. Most of the labels I have seen are really, most of the diabetic people get really attracted towards these labeled diets. So please do not go for labels. For example, if I talk about any of these sugar-free desserts, sugar-free mithais, they are not really sugar-free, because अगर एकदम sugar-free है तो वो मीठा क्यों लग रहा है, right? This is something that we need to think, कि अगर वो exactly sugar-free है तो वो इतना मिठास उसमें क्यों है? So it is because instead of sugar, what they add is sugar alcohol. Now this sugar alcohol in itself is a more processed form of sugar. तो cornstarch जो है, कॉर्नस्टार्च से जो ग्लूकोज है, उस ग्लूकोज से ये शुगर अल्कोहल बनाया जाता है. सो एक्सट्रीमली प्रोसेस्ड वर्जन ऑफ योर नॉर्मल शुगर, नॉर्मल शक्कर, नॉर्मल हनी, वेरी एक्सट्रीमली प्रोसेस्ड वर्जन. तो वो शुगर अल्कोहल है उसमें, विच इज मच बेटर इफ यू डोंट हैव देम. मच इट्स वर्स देन एनी ऑफ द नॉर्मल शुगर्स जिसके बारे में मैंने अभी बताया था आपको. The thing is why they are able to write it as sugar free is because our food laws are such कि अगर हम शुगर अल्कोहल यूज कर रहे हैं अपने प्रोडक्ट में, तो the laws permit us to call it sugar free, but technically it's not sugar free. The same thing is any of these gluten free junk and everything, right? So all of these gluten free junk, none of them is really gluten free, क्योंकि अगर कोई भी gluten free खाने के सामान को मास प्रोड्यूस किया गया है, तो क्योंकि अगर जब वो आपने कहा ग्लूटेन फ्री कुकीज और ग्लूटेन फ्री पास्ता और ग्लूटेन फ्री नूडल्स, इट्स मास प्रोड्यूस्ड, राइट, इफ इट्स बीइंग सोल्ड कमर्शियली, तो वो मास प्रोड्यूस कोई भी ग्लूटेन फ्री चीज को करना पॉसिबल नहीं है, क्योंकि ग्लूटेन के बिना उसको बाइंड करना, उसको शेप देना इज इम्पॉसिबल. सो व्हाट दे डू इज दे वुड एड अ बाइंडर विच इज अ वेरी अल्ट्रा प्रोसेस्ड ingredient like a chemical, and these binders are mostly starches like tapioca starch, potato starch, xanthan gum. These are names of these chemical binders. तो ये बाइंडर डालने के बाद ही वो उसको कुछ शेप दे के उसको मास प्रोड्यूस कर सकते हैं. सो एट द एंड ऑफ द डे व्हाट यू आर डूइंग इज यू आर हार्मिंग योर गट बैरियर इंटीग्रिटी, क्योंकि आपको जितना अल्ट्रा प्रोसेस्ड चीजें आप खाएंगे वो उतना ही आपके इन्फ्लेमेशन को बढ़ाएगा, उतना ही आपके कंडीशन को वर्सन करेगा. सो स्टे अवे फ्रॉम ऑल ऑफ दीज लेबल्ड काइंड ऑफ फूड्स, लेबल्ड काइंड ऑफ डाइट्स. None of this are going to help. Gluten free, in fact, in my book also I say that go gluten free for first phase 1 and phase 2, which is 8 weeks. But what kind of gluten free? We are talking about jawar bhakri, we are talking about porridges which are millet porridges, we are talking about having amaranth, we are talking about having bajra, little millet, proso millet. So that is the way a gluten free diet should be. It should not be about just buying snacks, ये कुकीज ले लिया, ये चकली ले लिया, ये ले लिया, सब कुछ ले लिया ऑफ द शेल्फ, एंड जस्ट कीप पंपिंग अ लॉट ऑफ दीज अल्ट्रा प्रोसेस्ड इंग्रेडिएंट्स इनटू योर बॉडी. That is definitely not the way. So these are the two major things that I wanted to speak about. Now the do's, कि do's में करना क्या है. Of course I cannot emphasize more the importance, the value of a good lifestyle when it comes to diabetes. So again I just don't want to break it down into कि 2 points that only do ये सिर्फ ये 2 चीजें करो and there will be a magic and everything will be back to normal. But I have to at the end of the day just give you 2 to 3 points to work upon. But at the end of the day, as I said, if you're type 2 diabetic, you can follow the entire book as it is, which means that you follow the 3 R's, right? The right quality of foods, the right timings, do not eat too late in the night, lunch को specially बहुत ज़्यादा delay मत होने दो. Your work is important, I understand, you're at office, I understand, but your health is important, and if you want to work for more years in your life, if you want to live a more productive life, if you don't want to spend the rest of your life either in a hospital or making rounds of a doctor's clinic, then please start having lunch on time. Your lunch timing should be 11:30 to 1. In fact, if you're diabetic, I would say 12 to 12:30, nothing more. So the timings are very important. Eating mindfully, not snacking around every time, not watching TV and just eating snacks mindlessly. These are things which are there already in the book. Follow them. Follow the 3-phased program. All of this is extremely important. Now when we come to the strategy of managing it, what does Western science tell us, right? Because Western science, if you look at it, Western science is more about managing the blood sugar level, whether it's type 1 or type 2. So therefore, if it's type 1, we would have the insulin pumps are there, the injections are there, because as I said, type 1 में insulin produce ही नहीं होता है. So of course Western science has this approach of then giving insulin to the body externally, right, with the aim of managing the blood glucose level. In type 2, it's also it's the same strategy that we got to manage the blood glucose level. But if you look at it deeply, as I said, this problem of diabetes is just not about blood sugar level. वो blood sugar level के द्वारा manifest हो रहा है. That is how we perceive, that is how we are able to gauge it, or that is how we are able to pick it up from a blood report. but that's just a manifestation. सिर्फ उसी को control कर देने से are we really targeting the root cause? Are we really targeting the core of the problem? No, because the core of the problem is a lot more deeper, right? If it's type 1, then the core of the problem is your pancreas gland itself, which is not working, which has got inflamed, which is on fire. In type 2 also there is inflammation, the integrity of the gut barrier has been compromised. So are we doing those things just by having medicines? Are we able to address those issues? No. Taking insulin, taking glycomet, any of these things, none of these will address the core issue. And that is why I always would want to see what Ayurveda says. Of course, you take your doctor's consultation, you take the medicines as it's required, but it's also valuable to see what and how Ayurveda perceives type 1 and type 2 diabetes, right? So we'll talk about type 2 diabetes first. So in type 2 diabetes, as I said, it's more of a lifestyle disease caused where we see there is weight gain, there may be a host of other metabolic syndromes as well, like as I said, cholesterol, blood pressure, all of those things, and you can very well just follow the book as it is. Now in Ayurveda, what they say is that pancreas is a seat of fire. They believe the organ, the gland pancreas, that's a seat of fire. In fact, they have a term which is called Agneya Grantha, which means literally a seat of fire. Now in type 1 diabetes, it is believed that the seat of fire, the fireplace itself has caught fire. So when a fireplace itself will catch fire, it's completely wasted, right? So that is what happens to the pancreas in type 1 diabetes. So it's completely inflamed, it's as though on fire, and therefore the pancreas is not working, the insulin is not getting produced. So when that is the case in type 1 diabetes, Ayurveda says that the first thing you need to do is you need to have foods which are bitter, of course, but which are extremely cooling because of the scenario that I explained. So type 1 diabetes is about eating foods which are bitter and cooling, and also avoiding foods which are hot. So that's type 1 diabetes, because if your pancreas is already on fire, so to speak, you do not want to have more heating foods and aggravate the condition. On the contrary, type 2 diabetes is not about pancreas not producing the insulin. It produces the insulin, but the insulin is not effective, and that is looked as a blockage in Ayurveda. So the insulin is there, but it's blocked, it's ineffective, and that is seen as a kapha dominant situation in Ayurveda. When we talk about blockages, what we understand is that it's a kapha dominant situation in Ayurveda compared to type 1 diabetes, which is pitta dominant, which is fire dominant. So now coming back to type 2 diabetes, because it's kapha dominant, what we want is hot foods, because it's only the hot and spicy foods that are, so to speak, kind of dissolve that kapha, which is seen as something mucousy and slimy. So to summarize, type 1 diabetes, bitter and cooling foods. Type 2 diabetes, bitter foods but hot and spicy. So you see it's very contrastingly different when it comes to food choices of type 1 and type 2. Now because we want to have bitter and hot spicy foods in type 2, as I said, you go back to the book, follow everything to the T. Chitraka, Trikatu are very hot and potent herbs, so therefore very good for type 2 diabetes. Trifla, even the Daruharidra, even the millets that are mentioned. Choose heating millets in the summer season, choose heating millets in the winter season, and choose the cooling millets in the summer season. Do the phase 1, do the phase 2, and you're going to see a world of difference in the way your body responds. Do not overdo on the meat. Just once a week or twice a week is good enough. Even if you're working out, if you're really worried about your protein intake, you can take away isolate powder. If you're vegetarian, then please don't even bother yourself with eating meat or eggs or anything like that. So this is about type 2. Now when we come to type 1, as I said, what we need is bitter and cooling foods. So what are these cooling foods? I'll give you a few examples. Amla is a very good cooling food, very good for type 1. Vetiver, I have done a video on vetiver, which is the khaskhas. So use that. I had done a video on how you can use the vetiver roots in the water and make a drink and even drink it as a drinking water all through the day. So please go to my reels and check that out. So vetiver is a very good cooling food. Then even the cucumber, the lauki, the ghee, the buttermilk. Curd is something which both type 1 and type 2 should avoid because it can, increase the inflammation in the body. But buttermilk and ghee are excellent both for type 1 and type 2. So, that is there. Then even giloi, guduchi, like it's known as giloi, also some people know as guduchi. Even that is something which is excellent for type 1. Aloe vera, all of these foods are excellent for type 1. What I also want to emphasize is that type 1 people should not be having too much of hot and spicy food, which often gets unnoticed. So I work with a lot of these young girls who have got like type 1 diabetic, teenage girls, and of course they do not know that they should not be having a lot of hot and spicy foods because, as I said, in type 1 diabetes what you need is cooling foods. So red chili powder is something that according to Ayurveda at least is something that is a complete no-no. That is something that you should completely avoid if you're type 1 diabetic. So that is one thing. In fact, a lot of these sambar masalas and pav bhaji masala, all the ready-made masala that you have in the market, all of them have the red chili powder, so you also stay away from them. You can make them at home without the red chili powder, but just don't have the ready-made one. Ginger, garlic, pepper, green chilies, these are all hot and spicy foods which type 1 diabetic people should minimize as much as possible. Even a lot of these young girls, young boys have a lot of seeds these days because they somehow feel it's very healthy. But let me tell you, a lot of seeds are very hot and spicy. For example, sesame seeds, these are hot and spicy, not spicy, but these are seeds which are heating. Even olive, it's a heating seed. So of course these are good for certain people, right? So type 2 diabetic people, it's great, but for type 1 diabetic people, these are heating seeds, so you should not be having sesame and urad dal. Urad dal is heating itself, or even a kulthi ka dal, or this olive seed. So all of these heating foods which are there, this is something that type 1 diabetic people should minimize as much as possible. So this was about food. The second point is about exercise. Now when it comes to exercise, again there's a world of difference between type 1 and type 2. See, type 2 people, what is commonly seen are people who are overweight. Again, I'm saying commonly seen because exceptions are always there. But commonly it is seen that type 2 diabetic people are overweight people. And these are people who will always benefit if they lose a little weight. What I mean weight is basically fat loss. And any kind of muscle build-up they do through sensible exercise program, the blood sugar responses always gets better. So for type 2 diabetic people, it's very important that they work out. Now, when I say it's very important that they work out, doesn't mean that you start doing an HIIT from today when you have been a totally sedentary person all through your life. You have to build it up gradually. So you can start with anything as little as 10 minutes of walking. Gradually, you increase your, not even exercise frequency, but also exercise duration. You also kind of bring more variety of exercise. So if you're starting with a walk, then maybe, once you start feeling more stronger, and also when you feel that you have gotten that discipline of being consistent, then you can start weight training, or you can just start using resistance bands. Anything as minimum as twice a week of resistance training is going to accelerate that, anabolic process in the body, which is going to help you deal with all your diabetic complications, not just the sugar. It is also going to act as an anti-inflammatory process, because when you exercise sensibly, it becomes anti-inflammatory. But you go obsessive about exercise, it goes the reverse way. Then exercise itself can be inflammatory, right? So it's the dose that makes the poison. So for type 2 diabetic, go for a sensible exercise program. When I was doing the project number 1, I had explained what a progressive overload is. A progressive overload is a scientific term for the entire concept, जहाँ पे आप थोड़े से शुरू करते हैं और धीरे धीरे बढ़ाते हैं. So how do you actually do this when you're strength training? Do you increase the reps or the set or the number of the pound of weight that you're lifting? All of that I had explained in project number 1. The video is there in the guide section, so you can go and check that out. So that is what is required for type 2 diabetes. Now type 1 diabetes are mostly, again exceptions are there, but I'm talking about the more common cases. Type 1 diabetic are people who are constantly losing weight. They are feeling hungry all the time, they are eating, but somehow there's always a weight loss happening, because of which they are always, most of the time, extremely fatigued. So they might or might not have the energy to do a full-fledged exercise program. So again, it's a very individual thing, depending on how you feel and how you are, you take up exercise. But what is more important, what Ayurveda says, because this is what is observed in type 1 diabetic, that they are most of the time not having enough energy to go for a full-fledged workout. What Ayurveda says, what the Ayurveda books say, is that for type 1 diabetic people, it is important that they do hand movement exercises more. If you feel strong enough, you do a complete full body as well, but what is more important is hand movement exercises for type 1. What I mean by hand movement is, what Ayurveda says is some light gardening, because you use a lot of your arms, your elbows, your wrist, your fingers, everything gets used. So a bit of gardening is what is recommended in the book. But if that is not there and it's not practically possible, what I usually suggest is that using just your arms, like, right, you can lift your arms up, down, there can be rotation, you can be rotating your wrist, flexing, extension, all of this, as many movements of your wrist, fingers, elbow, shoulder. That is the kind of exercise that is going to help type 1 diabetic people, especially on days when you feel too tired and fatigued to do a proper full-fledged workout. You can take a ball and you can do that squeezing exercise, which is done keeping a ball in the hand, a small smiley yellow ball, I don't know what it is called. So that is again an exercise that is very, very good for the flexion and extension of your fingers. So this is about exercise for type 1 and type 2 diabetic people. And the third, again a very important point, very underrated, overlooked, that is stress. So stress is something, I have seen people, and especially people who are diabetic, the good thing is we have a lot of these blood glucose monitors, which are very easy to use at home by a common person these days. So a lot of these people have started monitoring it almost on a daily basis, or twice a week or something like that at home. So it's very easy to now see how your responses change, and a lot of my clients have themselves noticed that if they're really stressed about something, they have seen how their blood sugar rises up. And when I say stress, I'm just not talking about stress that, oh, बारिश हो रही है, stress हो रहा है, office कैसे जाऊँ. I'm not talking about that kind of stress. I'm talking about stress which we internalize, which we keep thinking about. So there's some issue which is bothering you and you keep internalizing it, you keep thinking about it, it's dwelling inside you day after day, month after month, years after years. That kind of resentment, that kind of stress which builds up and actually takes the whole of you, becomes a part of you, that kind of stress is really, really very, very bad for diabetes. Also seen as a risk factor. So diabetes in itself is a risk factor for heart attacks, for any cardiac event. I'm going to talk about heart diseases in some other session which I take separately. But diabetes is a very well-known risk factor for any kind of cardiac event that may happen, irrespective of the age and gender. And then along with stress, it's like adding जो बोलते हैं ना आग में घी देने का काम करता है, it is like that. So it is something that we have to really actively work upon. It is something that people don't talk about very much, because stress को कोई blood report से गेज नहीं किया जाता. कोई ब्लड रिपोर्ट हमारे पास, लैब रिपोर्ट नहीं आता है बताने के लिए कि आपके पास इतना स्ट्रेस है, और हम उसके लिए अगर कुछ इंटरवेंशन करते हैं तो फिर हम उसको चेक भी नहीं कर पाते कि अच्छा मेरा स्ट्रेस कम हो गया है क्या, लाइक द वे वी ऑफन मॉनिटर अ ब्लड ग्लूकोज. But stress is something that you cannot overlook. So again, as I say, for all the lifestyle diseases, ultimately it's about a good lifestyle. And also a lot of people have been asking me, so I want to clarify that when I say it's a good lifestyle, it doesn't mean that the lifestyle has to be 10 on 10, right? Because no one's lifestyle goes on a linear path, right? You take your efforts, you get back to action, you try to make things happen in terms of your food timings, in terms of your consistency towards exercise, consistency towards sleep timings, and then of course some real incident may happen where you feel that you're going a little haywire. That's completely fine. Your lifestyle cannot take a linear path all through your life. It is okay for it to, you know, rise and fall, as long as what is important is that it always rises once it falls. So that is what is important. एक बार अगर गिरे हैं तो उठना जरूरी है, गिर गए वो गलत हो गया ऐसा नहीं है. So with that note, I'll finish this and I'll take up any questions if there are.
Is having fats first thing in the morning okay for everyone who wants to lose weight or is diabetic?
Is taking fats early in the morning good for fat loss?
Good for anybody who wants to lose weight or is diabetic.
Okay, so I would say that, you know, if it's a very little amount of fat, like what I say is that, you know, so basically the morning time when you wake up, it's the kapha time. So if you're waking up anything like till 10 a.m., it's the kapha dominant period, right? Even according to the circadian rhythm diet, which the Western world has kind of understood. If you want, you go and read about Dr. Panda, who has an Indian scientist but living abroad. He has done this complete research on circadian rhythm. I think he has written a book as well, if I'm not wrong. And you see how it blends with this whole concept of Ayurveda timings. But to cut the story short, the thing is that once you wake up, it's about having food which is warm and which is light. Now, if you add too much fat to something, it obviously doesn't stay lighter. So if you're having, the best thing is to wake up and have some sort of herbal tea. कौन से herbal tea हैं, randomly कुछ mix नहीं करना है. इस बुक में बहुत सारे recipes हैं herbal tea के. Morning में उठते ही कौन सा लेना है, सीजन पे डिपेंडेंट भी है ये सब, कौन से सीजन में क्या लेना है. अगर आप टाइप 1 डायबिटिक है तब तो आपको हीटिंग स्पाइसेस लेना ही नहीं है, जैसे मैंने बताया. सो स्टे अवे फ्रॉम पेपर, जिंजर, गार्लिक, ऑल ऑफ दीज थिंग्स. टाइप 2 है तब आप कोई भी रेसिपी यूज कर सकते हैं बुक से. So these recipes, these herbal teas might have some ghee in it, but if it's just a part of a recipe and a very small amount, it's fine. But if you're just having too much of fat as soon as you wake up and not a part of a herbal tea recipe, then I'll say no.
Doing exercise with shin splints, can it cause severe pain?
Doing exercise
with shin splints?
No, that depends, right? I mean, what kind of, again, if you have, you know, gone way ahead, way too much and way too faster, then it can, you know, cause a lot of, you know, injury where you might need to see a professional and might need to take professional help. So it depends on the intensity of the injury that is there.
Can lactose intolerant people take whey isolate protein?
Yes, whey isolate doesn't have lactose. तो अगर आप लैक्टोज इंटॉलरेंट है तो भी आप वे आइसोलेट ले सकते हैं, क्योंकि वे आइसोलेट में लैक्टोज होता ही नहीं है.
Is microbiome test useful?
So personally I don't find it useful, because there was a time many years back when I did give it a chance. I did try using it in my practice, but to say like just in a short, I don't find it useful. I have kind of tried it, but I haven't find it useful, especially with the kind of effort you put into it and also with the kind of money you spend on it. It isn't worth it.
2 meals a day with no snacking is useful for diabetes type 2?
So it's not about two meals a day with no snacking. Yeah. So you need to have proper meals. So breakfast, lunch, dinner, ये 3 तो करना ही है. Evening में भी एक light snack होना चाहिए. So it's never about 2 meals a day. If you're talking about intermittent fasting, तो intermittent fasting बिल्कुल नहीं करना है. You have to wake up. You have to drink something warm. Like I said, you know, the herbal drink is there. So do that. Then you have a nice light breakfast, which is a nice millet porridge or a kanji. So many recipes are there on my Instagram. So many recipes are there in my book. And then have a proper wholesome lunch. Have again a snack so that you don't kind of be very hungry for dinner and then overeat in dinner and then, you know, have dinner. What I want to say, what is important here is that you don't have to eat every 2 hours. Now, that is something that is not required. What is very important is that you eat whenever you are hungry. So that is important. अगर आपके सामने किसी ने पिज्जा का डब्बा खोल दिया and just because your senses have kind of taken it in, आपको उसका smell पसंद आ गया, you have seen it with your eyes, basically your senses are stimulated now and you suddenly feel कि नहीं भूख है, मैं खा सकती हूँ, खा जाते हैं, पता है. Okay, so what is important is that you recognize what is true hunger, कि कब मुझे एक्चुअल में भूख लग रही है। भूख और ये जो एपेटाइट बिल्ड हुआ है कोई खाना देखकर, ये एक फॉल्स हंगर है। एक ट्रू हंगर होता है, एक फॉल्स हंगर होता है। So if you want to really work on your diabetes, try to recognize your true hunger and eat only when you are hungry. You don't have to eat every 2 hours. At the same time, don't starve yourself. अगर आपको भूख है, true hunger है, then you should go ahead and have your meal.
How to remove continuous weakness from type 2 diabetes?
Okay, so I'll just take one. I can see the question, so I'll take it myself. So there's also another one who's asking, can decreasing inflammation lead to improvement in fatigueness? So kind of related. So you can improve your energy levels, yes, if you remove inflammation. And inflammation is there in type 2 diabetics. So there's another person who has asked a similar question. So yes, your fatigue can be really worked upon. You can have great energy levels if you work on your inflammation, and even if you're type 2 diabetic. The way to go is, as is what I have given a gist of it, follow the book A to Z, and you will see a lot of good improvements in your energy levels. First of all, खाने से डरो मत, कार्ब्स को हटाओ मत। हर चीज से सोचोगे कि फ्रूट्स खाऊंगा तो भी प्रॉब्लम है, राइस खाऊंगा तो भी प्रॉब्लम है, कार्ब्स खाऊंगा तो भी प्रॉब्लम है, थोड़ा चीनी ले लूंगा चाय में तो भी प्रॉब्लम है। अगर इतना सोचोगे, then obviously it leads to a lot of fatigue, because at the end carbs is something which is giving you a lot of energy. So sensible eating is what is required. If you eat sensibly and at the same time don't try doing everything all at once. आप sensibly खाने की पहले कोशिश करो, थोड़ा सा आपको खाने के साथ अच्छा फील होगा, then you go ahead and take up any one lighter intensity workout to begin with. वो lighter intensity workout के साथ आप stable feel करेंगे, strong feel करेंगे, then you build it up. Don't increase your exercise in any manner exponentially. It should be gradual, but do everything gradually. Work on things one at a time, and you'll really see a lot of improvements, not only in your fatigue and energy levels, but also in your blood work, 3 months, 4 months down the line.
Does gut microbiome affect the food we crave for?
Yes, of course. Like I've written a complete, I think, one paragraph, if not a couple of pages, on how gut microbiome influences our cravings, our appetite. And if you see the reviews which are there in the book is essentially about restoring the microbiome. And if you read the reviews which is there on Amazon about the book, it's also there in the highlights of my page. 99.9% people have said that they experience zero cravings just a week or two into the program, essentially driving the point that the moment you start working on your inflammation, on your gut barrier, on your gut ecosystem, the cravings do go away. Because at the end, obesity or any of these things that we talk about, it's not a matter of willpower, like the way we kind of have made people to believe. Because the moment we say it's a matter of willpower, we also try to shame people that, see, you're not good enough. I mean, you couldn't control, you have no willpower, you're just so useless. But it's really just not about that all the time. There are certain microbes which can drive certain cravings no matter how hard you try. And that's the reason why we have a phase 1, because when you do the phase 1, you kind of wipe off those obnoxious and those crave building microbes through all the kind of practices that is there in phase 1. And therefore what we try to do is kind of build a completely new ecosystem through the practices given in the book. And that is how then you see that it's just not about willpower, but it's about cravings naturally disappearing on its own. So it's really not that difficult, and then you understand how body physiology is connected to our cravings, and it's just not about the question of discipline and willpower all the time. Okay, thank you so much, guys. I can see a lot more questions coming in, but I think we have really done a long session today. So if there are any more questions, please put them in the comments, and I'm surely going to answer them later in the day for you. Thank you so much.